Some nights on the road stay with you forever. Not because of the miles you've traveled or the places you've seen, but because of the things you encounter. Things that defy explanation. This is one of those nights. A lonely highway, miles from anywhere, swallowed by darkness, so complete it feels like a living thing. The kind of night where every shadow seems heavier, every sound sharper, and every decision carries a weight you don't realize until it's too late. I wasn't supposed to take that road. It was a detour, an inconvenience forced by circumstance. But it led me somewhere I wasn't prepared to go. What happened on that isolated stretch of Montana highway still lingers in my mind. An ordinary night turned into something I'll never forget. A strange encounter that left me with questions I still can't answer. And perhaps some questions are better left unanswered. This is my story. A story of silence, shadows, and the unexpected. Of an ordinary drive interrupted by something I'll never truly understand. If you've ever wondered what it's like to come face to face with the unknown, stay with me. You may not see the road the same way again. The night was thick with darkness, the kind that swallows the world whole. Driving through Montana, I found myself on an empty stretch of highway, where time seemed to stretch along with the road. The miles ahead and behind were the same, black, unchanging, and endless. My headlights cut through the void, but even their beams seemed feeble, swallowed by the oppressive night. I hadn't seen another vehicle in hours, not a single pair of headlights, breaking the monotony. The silence in the cab of my truck was comforting at first, but as the hours dragged on, it began to feel heavier, almost unnatural. The fuel gauge caught my eye, the needle dipping dangerously low. My company's oversight in calculating my mileage had left me stranded on a ticking clock, searching for a place to refuel. When I finally reached out for help, they directed me to a station far off my intended route. A detour, they said, a short one. But as I veered off the main highway onto a smaller road, I realized just how isolated I had become. The familiar hum of the highway was replaced by a different kind of quiet, one that felt like it was waiting for something. The road narrowed, the reflective paint on the pavement becoming my only guide. Trees crowded in from both sides, their shadows looming like silent watchers. The cold air seeped through the cab, a sharp reminder of how far I was from warmth, from light, from safety. I turned up the heater, but it did little to cut through the chill that settled in my chest. Out here, there were no streetlights, no signs of civilization, just the occasional outline of a fence disappearing into the dark. As I drove further, the sense of isolation deepened. My headlights caught glimpses of frost glinting on the edges of the road, and every now and then, the wind would nudge a branch or scatter a few leaves across my path. It was subtle, but the world seemed to feel different out here, emptier, more distant, like I had left the map behind. My truck was the only source of noise, its engine a low hum that echoed in the stillness. It felt like even the night itself was holding its breath. And then there was the roadkill. At first it was just a shape, a dark blur against the asphalt. I almost didn't notice it, distracted by the rhythm of the drive and the weight of my thoughts. But as my headlights swept over it, the shape grew clearer, and an unease began to creep over me. I slowed down, unsure of what I was looking at. It wasn't uncommon to see debris or the remains of an animal out here, but something about this was off. The outline was too large, too defined. My grip on the wheel tightened as I approached, my eyes locked on the shape in the distance. The closer I got, the more I realized this wasn't a typical encounter. It wasn't just a piece of trash or a small animal caught in the headlights. No, this was different, larger, more unsettling. I could feel my pulse quicken, my breathing shallow as the truck rolled closer. I wanted to look away, to ignore it and keep driving, but my curiosity wouldn't let me. It felt as if the road itself was forcing me to confront whatever lay ahead. The truck crept closer, the headlights inching over the shape in the road. My heart pounded, louder than the hum of the engine behind me. The air inside the cab felt heavier now, each breath more deliberate, as if the darkness outside was trying to find its way in. The object finally came fully into view, lying there, motionless, right in the middle of the road. I slowed to a near stop, eyes straining to make sense of what I was looking at. It was larger than most roadkill I'd encountered in my years on the road. The shape wasn't right either. There was no fur, no distinct form that could be tied to any animal I knew. It was just a mass, pale and raw, illuminated starkly by my headlights. I rolled past it slowly, my truck crawling along as if the engine itself hesitated to disturb the stillness. As one passed the object, I caught a fleeting but vivid glimpse enough to send a chill down my spine. What I saw didn't fit with anything my mind could explain. A bare ribcage, intact but exposed, surrounded by a mess of dark, glistening tissue. No head, no fur, no features. Just flesh, just bones, just something that shouldn't have been there. Instinctively hit the brakes, my truck coming to a stop a few yards down the road. My mind raced, replaying that glimpse over and over. What had I just seen? Was it an animal? Could it have been human? The question swirled, and before I realized it, I had shifted into reverse, slowly backing up until the red glow of my brake lights illuminated the shape once again. The silhouette in the dim light was grotesque, unnatural, almost as though the road itself had spit it out from some hidden place. I engaged the parking brake and sat there for a moment, gripping the wheel as I debated my next move. My better judgment told me to keep driving, to leave it behind and not look back. But another part of me, curiosity, fear, something else urged me to get out and see for myself. Against every instinct, I grabbed my jacket and flashlight, opened the door, and stepped into the cold night air. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the faint hum of my truck behind me. My boots crunched softly against the asphalt as I walked closer, the beam of my flashlight slicing through the darkness. With every step, my pulse quickened, the unease growing stronger. The light finally fell on the object, illuminating it fully for the first time. What I saw froze me in my tracks. There it was, a headless, skinless form, its ribcage fully intact and stark white against the surrounding mess of raw, steaming flesh. Ligaments clung desperately to bones, holding them in place as if trying to keep the structure from falling apart completely. The mass of tissue glistened in the light, slick and unnatural. There was no fur, no clothing, no signs of what it once had been, just bones and meat, lying in the middle of the road like a discarded carcass. I couldn't move. My jaw hung slightly open as I stood there, transfixed by the grotesque scene. The flashlight trembled in my hand, casting faint shadows that only added to the horror. My breath came in shallow bursts, visible in the frigid air, as one tried to make sense of what I was seeing. The ribcage, it was too large for a deer, too intact for a typical roadkill. My mind wavered between logic and panic. Could it have been human? And if so, what had happened here? I reached for my phone, fumbling with numb fingers to check for a signal. Nothing. The screen taunted me with the words, "No service," a reminder of just how alone I was out here. My thoughts raced. Should I go back to my truck? Should I try to contact the authorities when I reached the next town? My flashlight beam wavered, and instinctively, I swept it around the area, scanning for anything that might explain the scene. And that's when I saw them. At the edge of the road, just beyond the fence line, a pair of glowing eyes reflected the light back at me. Then another pair, and another. Coyotes, a small pack of them, standing motionless, watching me. Their eyes shone like tiny mirrors, unblinking, as if assessing the situation. My heart pounded even harder. They didn't move, didn't flinch, just stood there, their silhouettes barely visible against the darkness. And then they started moving, slipping through the gaps in the fence, one by one, their quiet, deliberate steps carrying them closer to the road. Closer to me. I could feel my heartbeat quicken, the cold air pressing harder against my chest. The flashlight trembled in my hand as I swept it back toward the mangled carcass lying in the road. The coyotes weren't looking at it though. They were looking at me. They moved in unison, their formation tightening as they neared the edge of the pavement. I took a step back, the gravel crunching under my boots, and suddenly realized just how exposed I was. My truck was 50 feet away, its hum a distant comfort I wasn't sure I could reach in time. My mind raced. Coyotes don't usually approach humans, especially not like this. But these weren't behaving normally. Their movements were calculated, almost predatory. I tried to rationalize it. They were probably just drawn by the scent of the carcass. But the way their eyes followed me, the way their bodies angled toward mine instead of the pile of flesh in the road, made me feel like more than just an observer in this moment. I was part of the scene now, a participant in whatever this was. The largest of the group, a coyote with a coat that seemed darker than the others, took a few more steps forward, stopping just short of the edge of the road. It lowered its head slightly, as though bracing itself, and let out a low, guttural growl that sent a shiver down my spine. The others responded immediately, their postures shifting, their focus intensifying. They were close enough now that I could see their breaths rising in faint clouds against the cold air, their movements slow and deliberate, as if they were waiting for a signal. I couldn't stand there any longer. The primal instinct to survive surged through me, and I turned on my heel, walking quickly, too quickly, back toward the truck. My boots hit the pavement harder than I intended, the sound echoing in the stillness. I forced myself not to run, knowing that the slightest indication of fear might provoke them. My flashlight beam bounced erratically as I made my way back, the red glow of the brake lights growing larger with every step. Behind me, I could hear them soft footfalls, barely audible but unmistakable. They were following me. The gap between us felt smaller with every step I took, the weight of their presence pressing against my back like a physical force. I kept my eyes locked on the truck, the cabin door, my only goal. When I finally reached it, I yanked it open and climbed inside, slamming it shut behind me with a force that shook the entire cab. My hands fumbled to lock the doors, the sound of the mechanism echoing like a lifeline. Inside the truck, the world felt momentarily safer, though the tension still gripped me like a vice. My breath came in shallow bursts as I stared through the windshield, the brake lights casting an eerie red glow on the road behind me. In that light, I saw their silhouettes, 5 of them, standing just beyond the edge of the truck's lights. They didn't come closer. They didn't retreat. They just stood there motionless, their eyes still reflecting the dim light as they watched me from the darkness. I don't know how long I sat there, frozen, staring back at them. It felt like an eternity. The pack eventually began to disperse, retreating silently into the shadows beyond the road. One by one, they vanished until the night swallowed them completely. But even then, the feeling of being watched lingered. I sat there for a moment longer, my hands gripping the steering wheel, before finally releasing the parking brake and driving away. The carcass in the road remained where it was, a haunting reminder of the encounter I would never forget. As I drove further away from the scene, the darkness outside my truck felt heavier, more oppressive, as though it was following me. The questions I carried were like weights, pressing against my chest, refusing to be ignored. What had I just witnessed? Was it something naturally tragic but explainable accident? Or was it something far stranger, something that defied the limits of logic and reason? I didn't know then, and I still don't know now. What I do know is that the memory of that night has stayed with me, vivid and unrelenting. The image of that mangled body, headless, skinless, stripped to its bare bones, haunts my thoughts whenever I'm on a lonely stretch of highway. I've tried to push it away, to rationalize it as just a freak accident, but there are details that refuse to fit into any comfortable explanation. The lack of fur or clothing, the clean exposure of the ribcage, the behavior of the coyotes. All of it points to something more, something that doesn't sit easily in the realm of ordinary events. I sometimes wonder if I was supposed to see it, or if I just stumbled upon a moment I was never meant to interrupt. It's an unsettling thought that the world holds secrets we aren't equipped to understand, things that operate in the shadows, just outside the reach of our comprehension. That night on the Montana highway, I felt as though I had brushed up against one of those secrets, and it left me with more questions than answers. Even now, I can't help but think about the pack of coyotes, the way they watched me move together, their eyes reflecting the light like tiny mirrors. They didn't act like animals driven by instinct. They felt like something else, something aware. Their focus on me rather than. The carcass was chilling, as though I had become the intruder in their world. I've replayed their movements in my mind 1,000 times, trying to decipher their intent, but the truth remains as elusive as it was that night. Sometimes I consider going back to that stretch of road, revisiting the scene to see if there are any clues I might have missed. But then I think about what else I might find. The thought of standing there again, under that oppressive darkness, facing the unknown, is enough to keep me away. There are some things we aren't meant to revisit, and for me, that highway is one of them. If there's one thing I've learned from that night, it's that the most unsettling experiences aren't always the ones with clear answers. It's the questions that linger, the mysteries that go unsolved, that truly stay with us. And maybe that's why this story has stuck in my mind for so long. It's not just about what I saw or what I experienced, it's about the possibility that there's more to this world than we can ever truly understand. So I leave you with this. The next time you're driving down an empty road, miles from civilization, and you see something lying in your path, think twice before stopping. Because sometimes, what seems like an ordinary encounter can turn into a memory you'll never forget, a moment that leaves you questioning everything you thought you knew about the world around you. This was my story, but tell me, what do you think I witnessed that night? Could it have been something natural, or was it something beyond explanation? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more true horror stories that will leave you wondering what really hides in the dark.